begin. We do have Marty Cagan with us. We are actually very honored, and we've been talking about the book itself. What I would like to do today is just through this slide, make sure that we've got the rules in place, an introduction, and otherwise we will be asking hopefully questions. We will be asking Marty questions. We will use the chat for conversation, and if anyone has a question, please flag it on the chat, and then we will either Himanshu or I will just give you the authority to speak. And hopefully it will be a nice question. If there is a follow-on question, it depends how many we will be in here, but try not to have a follow-on question unless it is imperative and you cannot stop yourself. And we'll try and make sure that the questions come in flow nicely in some respect. And we do ask people, if when they're talking, to just show us their face, if that is possible, because it's always nice to talk to a face, even if it is a two-dimensional one. Otherwise, we're here. We have had 2 sessions of the book. Obviously, we cannot cover the whole book, but the book itself is very, very pacey and it slowly gets you into this world of product management. And when I started reading it, I was sort of a bit looking at it, and we're not going to have this debate, I hope, from a project manager's point of view. And slowly I was pulled in by understanding exactly what we're trying to do here to actually develop a tech product. Probably there will be questions whether this works only for tech products or not. But the ethos and the culture that comes through and the process and your attempt to make sure that we do actually understand the mistakes that we make, I think is very, very nice, and in small chapters, and you want to read the next one and the next one, almost like a novel. So we have enjoyed the book and we have discussed it, and today we have you to maybe clarify a few points from the book, talk about the future, talk about the past. In fact, beginning from the past was beautiful in the book itself, the original stories. So what we'll do is Himanshu will be the key questioner, and the public will be hopefully asking the clever ones. So thank you very much, Marty, for being here. Marty is in the west of the USA, so he's far, far away. Thank you.
No, thank you, Nick, and I'll quickly introduce Marty and say a couple of things about the book, and then we'll get going, just for people who've not read it or who do not know Marty, but I'll be surprised if they don't. So Marty began his career in the 80s with a decade as a software developer at HP, conducting research on software technology and building several software products for other software developers. After that, and now for over 35 years, he has worked on some of the most successful high-tech products of our time. He's worked as VP of products at Netscape, Senior VP of products at eBay, and has served as advisor to many, many startups and Fortune 500 companies in Silicon Valley. He since founded a Silicon Valley product group to pursue his interests in helping others create successful products through his writing, speaking, advising, and coaching. He's one of the highly sought after thought leaders in the tech product industry, and we're very fortunate to have Marty here today with us. But I'm sure I don't need to go into any more details about his career, as Marty is a very well-known name in product circles. So let's talk about the book. If I remember correctly, I read Marty's book, the first edition of it, when I was myself a budding product manager back in 2011. And agile methods were not as established in technology companies as they are today. And that was even before customer development and lean startup and things like that were popularized. That edition, the first one, focused more on startups. This edition, however, even though it is only the second one, is a completely different book. And that just says how fast the tech product industry has evolved. In this book, the focus is on challenges of growth stage companies and large enterprise companies. This book very quickly has become a gold standard for product managers, new and experienced alike. It is, in fact, the go-to book on product management today. So for those of us who've not read the book, it's divided into 5 sections and has a total of 67 chapters. At one point, Nick and I joked that the book is made up of 67 sprints. But part 1 is lessons from top tech companies. The second part is about getting the right people on board. Third part is about building the right product. Fourth part is about setting the right processes within the organization. And fifth part is probably one of the most important ones, is getting the culture right. So to start the conversation, Marty, we did a very quick word map of the book, and maybe we may not have been able to do it properly, but we did a word map of the book. What are your reflections on this?
Well, I'm surprised my own name would show up so many times. That's funny. Did I really write my last name that many times in the book? But aside from that, looks like the right words for sure. Yeah, looks good.
Yes, it is interesting that words like tech and technology do not appear very strongly in the list, while customers and business and the product itself appears, and that is what sort of went against our expectation, if you wish, until we realized what it is you're talking about, and I think this little cloud or whatever is actually giving us a feel of the book, because all the examples that you have, I think, are about technical products.
Yeah.
But the business is here, the customer is here, and indeed the customers are part of your subtitle. It's not just the tech bit that is part of your subtitle, but we were initially surprised by that. Actually, I did not notice that your name was so prominent. We have to double check that.
I don't know why I would have said my name, but anyway, it's all right. And yeah, I think that's all true. Engineers are probably mentioned many, many times. So, because really the book, of course, one of the big foundations is product design, engineering together are what makes great products. So yeah, I see all 3 of those terms pretty high there.
There's another word that I was expecting is mindset. You have, it isn't visible over here because it is mentioned only 8 times, but you have mentioned mindset at 8 different places in the book. So what are your thoughts on that? How important is mindset in getting all of this right?
Well, probably because mindset is one way to describe culture. So there are many different aspects to culture, and yeah, I can see culture right there. And so it's it's not so much mindset isn't so much a thing as much as a way to describe culture. That's all, I think. And it is very different, of course. I see this mindset. Most companies have this IT mindset, right? Where technology is a cost center. And they view it as a necessary evil, right? They know they have to pay for some developers, but they sure wish they didn't have to pay so much. And they also wish they got more out of it. That's one mindset. That's one culture. And the other kind of culture, of course, says, no, engineering is the heart of our company. Technology is what powers our whole business. It's not a cost center. It's the heart of our profit center. So we treat it very differently. All of these are ways of talking about a different kind of culture. You can name it whatever you want. I mean, there's no standard for that. But when you go into a company like Netflix, And you compare that with a company like, pick your favorite bank. They both run on technology, but boy, are they different. They are like night and day different. And then you can call that mindset, you can call it, you know, culture, whatever you decide to call it. Yeah, actually reminds me, there's a new book that just came out that's really a fun read. Since it sounds like you guys like books like I do. It's written by Reed Hastings, who's the founder of Netflix. And the book is really about Netflix's culture. And they refer to, the name of the book is No Rules, Rules. And the mantra in the book is, you don't lead with process, you don't lead with command and control, you lead with context, which is their way of describing empowered product teams. And it's a really fun book. It takes a very provocative and extreme position of really, you know, they push every decision possible down to the product teams. They don't want a command and control style organization. They make most agile organizations seem not agile at all because they are setting the bar so high. And it's a fun book because of that. They're extreme. They take an extreme position. They don't believe in vacation policy. They believe that the people they hire should be able to manage their own time. They don't believe in expense reporting policy. They believe that the people they hired should be able to do reasonable expense reports. They don't believe in prescriptive processes like so many companies do. They believe you hire smart people, you give them the tools they need and let them go. And so, yeah, it's an extreme version, but it's one of the companies that heavily influenced me. They are, like I said, on an sort of at one end of the spectrum, but there's actually much more in common between Netflix and companies like Amazon and Google and Apple than not. Much more in common.
I wish you were describing a university, but unfortunately you were not. Where you would think that at least people should be allowed to be empowered. But maybe that's one of the problems, maybe with education, that we don't produce the people who probably are the people that the engineering companies want. But,
my father was a longtime professor, and so I grew up hearing about all the politics in universities, and it never. He was like, just stay in industry, just stay in industry. So I listened to him.
Bless him.
Okay, fellows, the floor is open for your questions.
People are still thinking. I like this freedom of that you describe, and apparently is in the Netflix book, No Rules, Rules. But no rules, rules sometimes may lead us to very, very astray. And somewhere there has to be, I'm coming from an ethical angle here, essentially, and that is my consideration. And I see in the book you do have a point in page 160 something, you do mention a concern about ethics, and it is nice, but then you shy away from it a bit. And I would like you to say more about the ethical thing, which you describe also under risks, which to me is a bit strange that ethics is part of the risks. I thought that ethics should be the driver, not the risk. The same way that you suggested that engineering companies, the people there are the value.
Yeah, well, I think of it as a risk because most of course, there are always bad people in the world that will do bad things. So that's not really my focus. My focus is good people in the world that accidentally do bad things. That's what I see most often. If you look at the Facebook story, although I'm coming to the point of view that maybe some of the executives are not such good people, but in general, I don't think they intended to create as much damage to the world as they have. So what really is going on is those are risks. There are certainly risks. When we build a product, there's risks that people will buy it or like it. There's risks that people could figure out how to use it. There's risks that we might not be able to build it. And there's certainly risks about whether or not we can afford it and we can monetize it. But there are also risks about whether or not there will be one of these unintended consequences. And those are the ethical risks. And that's how I think of it. I spend a lot of time with product teams trying to get them helping them to solve hard problems. That's what product teams do. And framing it by risks is, I think, a very useful way to frame the work. What often happens, and honestly, the reason I started calling out ethical risk is because it's included with viability risk. In other words, viability means not whether our customers like it. The issue is, will it work for our business? And ethics is one of those things, just like security, just like privacy. Ethics is a viability risk. However, it's very rare that a company has a stakeholder, for example, that's worried about ethics. They have stakeholders that are worried about finance, that are worried about HR, that are worried about marketing, but they don't really have one. Now, an exception to that is Airbnb, that did have a chief ethics officer, and I'm glad for that. And in my new book, I highlight him. He's a longtime friend. He worked with me at eBay, and he was their chief ethics officer. But most companies don't have an ethics officer. So we needed a way for the product teams to deal with ethics more aggressively, rather than just wait and hope that some executive in the company is worried about it. And that's how it's framed. Now, of course, what's hard about it is true, I think, this is why product needs to take more responsibility for ethics. We in product teams are usually the first ones to see problems that are brewing, that are just starting. Because again, it's very rare in my experience that people are intentionally trying to do evil things. They do something that their customers are begging for and love, but they don't realize that actually is bad for the environment, or it's bad for children, or it's some other unintended way bad. And so the product teams often are the first ones to see that. The challenge is they don't always know what to do when they see it, especially because really the CEO needs to deal with most of these issues. And, you just have somebody way down an organization realizes a problem. A lot of times they don't know what to do with that. They know it's a problem, but they're scared, they don't understand the full picture, or they assume that the executives already know this and they've dealt with it, which is not always the case, of course. So I do think we as an industry need to do much more around ethics, no question about it. The new book does talk more about that, because the new book is aimed at leadership as opposed to product teams. And the leaderships are really the ones that take over these things and try to resolve the issues.
Indeed, it is a leadership thing. I don't know, Himanshu, is there someone else who wishes a question? Let me
I think Franco has a question.
I'm not sure. Franco makes a point. Franco, would Franco want to speak? We're trying to get the floor to ask the questions.
It was a consideration mine. I was saying that I think the rules like those of Netflix apply, and they have been applied when a business is exploding, and whatever you do, it works, even if the efficiency is very, very low. If you have to build a turnkey lump sum power plant common infrastructure of $3 billion with a margin of 3%, you simply cannot afford the Netflix rules, because you will go burst immediately. But if you are having a very large margin, even if you have efficiency very, very low, okay, it's work. You earn a lot of money, fine.
Well, so certainly I would encourage you, if you're interested, to read the Netflix book, because of course they discuss this pretty in several hundred pages worth of topic. I want to be clear, when their title, of course, was very provocative, No Rules, Rules. They don't believe in rules, but they do believe heavily in context. So don't think that means product teams are able to do whatever they want. It's very different than that. In fact, one of their mantra is, we lead with context, not with control. So instead of, one way of addressing what you're worried about, Franco, is you have managers and leaders that are very prescriptive. They tell people exactly what to do because they've worried about all these things. The other way is that you tell teams, this is the problem we need you to solve, and we will give you the context. Here's the business objectives. Here's the product vision. Here's the product strategy. Here are our principles. Here are our guidelines in terms of the guardrails. Like, we can't do things like this because it would be unethical, illegal, whatever. And on the other hand, this is all wide open. Whatever you want to do here is fine. That's the idea, is push the decisions down to the people who are working with the technology and with the customers every day, because they are really in the best position to make those decisions. And I would argue, if you're in a low, if you're in a high margin, high growth business, you're right. That growth will hide a lot of sins. I have seen that in so many companies that are really doing terrible job, but because their business is naturally, organically growing so fast, as long as they don't break the site, they're going to grow. On the other hand, if you've got a low margin business, you really need to leverage the talents of your people, especially if you depend on innovation. And in the tech world, we do depend on innovation. Now, that's different than, say, the manufacturing world, which is not trying to innovate typically. What they're trying to do is consistently replicate the same thing a million times with very little variance. That is a very different problem, very different context. But if you're a tech product company, like I would argue, like Netflix, like Spotify, like Trainline in London, or The Guardian, I would argue, is a media company, the BBC, if they're a tech-powered product company, then they really need to tap into the talent of their people. That's one of the themes I find in all the best companies in the world. There's definitely not just a Silicon Valley thing. It's all the best in the world. Now, it is harder for some leaders to do that than others. Some leaders, many leaders, are so addicted to command and control style leadership that they really do struggle to give control to others. But I think that we're already seeing an industry correct for that. If you look at the most valuable companies in the world in terms of market cap, it's not an accident that you see these companies that believe in empowerment.
That is an important point, and well taken. But again, there is so much power in some of these companies because of their success.
Yes.
Again,
I said
something may go wrong.
That's right. Look at Facebook, right?
Facebook, and also, for example, Amazon was fined some £1 billion a quarter of its turnover or something, but by the European Union for actually having a system, which is a very clever and logical system of essentially controlling all the data of other companies, essentially. Now, I cannot stop thinking that they knew that they are getting extra data from the companies, the small companies, that they are actually helping. Amazon is helping the small companies to actually find the market, and that was their defense. but this use of other people's data, I believe must have been intentional, and therefore what I'm trying to ask here is, do you feel that the European Union was actually wrong in finding a company like Amazon, and a company that you like because it is both innovative and executes, and you praise it in the last bit of your book in the culture.
Yeah.
I think that
Well,
if there is something like the European Union, product companies will cease being productive.
yeah. No, I understand. In fact, I understand the concerns. You know, I was at Netscape when we competed against Microsoft, and that was, and the government finally decided that Microsoft was behaving unfairly. Unfortunately, that was after they had already destroyed Netscape. But so I understand. I draw a distinction. I kind of have to draw a distinction between the policies of these companies and how good they are at creating products for their customers, for their business. What I usually do, there are some very smart people, I think much smarter than I am, and that I follow, that I learn from in terms of judging these, whether or not this is actually unethical, whether it's illegal, whether it's immoral, these kinds of questions. Some of those are very difficult questions, especially on companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon. The two people that I follow there are Ben Thompson, who is probably the major industry analyst in our industry, and Scott Galway, who's also a professor at NYU. And both of those people are they have very different opinions, but they are very, I mean, this is what they follow very much. And so I would argue they're better to judge that. And I point out that, you know, you can be great at product and you can use that skills for good and for not good. Absolutely. I generally don't talk much about the companies that I think are not good, not ethical companies. I never encourage anybody anymore to go to Facebook. I encourage them to leave Facebook. I think they crossed that line. In my opinion, Amazon and Google are companies that do much more good for the world than bad. I can't say that about Facebook.
Indeed, but they do have equivalents further east from where we are, companies, and there are companies that do exactly what Amazon and Google do in different parts of the world, and sometimes we're not very happy with their approach. We're happier with the freedoms that we believe in. But what I'm trying to say is that technology itself is such a big weapon that someone has to not let it loose, essentially.
Oh yeah, no, I am one of those people that believes there is a role for government regulation. Absolutely. And I think most of the people in the industry, the responsible people in the industry, agree with that. They just, there's always going to be debate about the right way to do that.
Indeed. Sorry, for Himanshu?
Nick, unless you had a question.
I was going to lighten things up just at least for a moment. In your book, you have 6 lovely profiles of some great product managers, and indeed we've seen you on YouTube praising what are essentially 6 very nice ladies, women. Did you intentionally find women? Do you think there's something about good product managers and the female sex? I'm not even sure if I'm using the right words here. But are there any product managers, male product managers, essentially, that you think could have been included? I love the fact that you've got these 6 ladies. They're beautiful. They are brilliant. They have fought, and you have brought them, make them alive to us. Yes, but
Yeah, let's talk about that. I'm actually going to share an article with you too. So absolutely. Do I know great male product managers? Yes. And it's interesting, when I started, I wanted to profile real product managers. That was my goal, real product managers. But I wanted them to be people, I wanted them to be for products that everybody knew. Because if the products are iconic, people could relate to the story much better than if I tell some obscure startup that you've never heard of. Then it's hard for people to really understand it. So I wanted them to be iconic products. So I started, and this is one of the lucky things for me. I've worked so long in this space with so many good companies. I had a long list. I started with what were the iconic products, and then who were the product managers? And I just wrote their names. And I did notice right away that a disproportionate number of them were women. And now, when I say disproportionate, I don't know what the real number is in our industry, but I'm pretty sure women make up less than half of the product managers in our industry, probably closer to more like 20%. But I'm just guessing. I have no idea. I've never seen a survey on that. However, on my list, they were about 2/3 of the list. So then I said, well, that's odd. Surprising. And of course, I decided to, I actually thought a lot about this, and I talked to several of my partners about this. I ended up writing a follow-up article, which I just shared with you, because I do believe that women in general make the best product managers. And I do believe that, and this is very, obviously I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a expert on this. This is very empirical, just from what I see. I also think there's good reasons why women make up such a significant percentage of these successful stories there. And a lot of them are a lot of it is not really for a nice reason. When I say that, it's because the biggest reason of all often is that virtually every tech company is run by a man. And it's not a surprise or an accident that they often have very big egos. I mean, really big egos. If you met some of these people, it's remarkable they can fit in a room. But when you have a CEO with a very strong ego, if you take another male product manager and put them in that same room, they usually butt heads. And what's remarkable to me, and this is just, again, my observation, is that when you put them with a female product manager, they often don't butt heads. And my amateur theory is because they don't feel threatened. They don't feel threatened. And they're able to listen to the product manager and really get it without feeling like they're being personally attacked or, start getting defensive or all these things these strong male egos often do. So anyway, I think that's one of the advantages. I also think women, there's a big element to persistence that is critical in hard products. And I think a lot of women have been forced to learn how to really fight hard to get what they want and need. And a lot of males I know are like, yeah, I'll give it 3 weeks. If that doesn't work, I'm going to do something else. And they give up too easily. So anyway, I think there's a number of reasons. This is all just theory, but I shared those reasons in that article. So if you'd like to read it, feel free. And yes, I definitely know. One of the reasons I shared that article is I believe that those characteristics of these women are valuable for men too. And so I encourage everybody to try to learn from these great product people. And yeah, I continue to see it though. In my new book, I profiled 8 leaders because the new book is aimed at leaders instead of product managers. And they are 2 heads of product, 2 heads of design, 2 heads of engineering, and 2 heads of companies. They're all 8 women as well, but they have amazing stories. They're just, I love telling the stories of these people who are not well known, but I think should be well known.
Tanya has a follow-up question for us.
Yes, there is a question by a lady, actually. We will ask her to ask you herself, Danya.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hi, Marty. This is interesting. You know, I've clicked on that link that you sent in the chat, and you've listed some, this is an article from 2016, I guess, and you listed some characteristics of women that probably might make them better product managers. And one of them is emotional intelligence, which we actually teach to students that is one of the most important characteristics in leadership. And we had this debate whether what makes better project managers, males or females. And we usually say something about emotional intelligence. And interestingly, you are saying emotional intelligence could be higher with females, and this is what is making them probably better product managers. But what I put in, so I would like your comment on this, but I also put another question based on the story you told or on the scenario you told. What if we have a CEO who is female and a product manager who is female as well? You know, the scenario where we have 2 males, here we have 2 females. Would you still have the same conflict, or do you think it would still be okay?
Honestly, you know, and this is the danger of generalization. I know some fabulous, in fact, I profiled 2 of my favorite leaders, and one of them's, by the way, London-based in the new book. These are fabulous people that I can't imagine them not doing really well with anybody, males or females. On the other hand, I also know some CEOs that are female that, you know, have the same big ego that men have, same big problem, unfortunately, a lot of the same problems that the male leaders have. So, you know, the individual plays a very big role there. But again, what we're talking about are generalizations, admittedly. And at least in my experience, first of all, there aren't nearly enough female CEOs. There are increasingly a good number of product managers and product leaders that are female. I feel like that has improved significantly over my career, you know, nearly 40 years now, but it's got way better. But CEOs are still, you know, it's almost rare still when I find female CEOs, and I think that should change. And I do think that the female CEOs I know on average are excellent. I mean, in many senses better. So we'll see, of course. We need time. We need to make sure, you know, we need to have it become more common. Investors have to invest in them. Then they have to be able to build their companies and show their prowess. But there's certainly plenty of successful ones already that I'm hoping that we'll see more women get into that position. You know, it is a brutal position. It's one of those positions, the CEO, that you don't really wish on anyone, male or female. There's so much. It's such a difficult role, but boy, they can either create a great company or, yeah, the wrong CEO, terrible company. So yeah, that's it. But that's a difficult question.
Okay, let me ask a technical question. You know, we are both, I mean, I'm particularly both a project manager and have been a product manager as well. And project managers love schedules, yeah? And typically product managers love roadmaps. But in the book, you've proposed that roadmaps are dead, and objectives and key results, that is OKRs, a goal-setting framework from Intel and Google. So that's what you propose. However, I was reading one of your blogs recently, and you've said, and I think we're coming back again to that culture question, but there are limitations in using this technique across the board. Can you please tell us more about that?
Yeah, but I will say you're really mixing 2 very big and important points. You're conflating them. One is the question of project management versus product management. And then the other question is, if you're talking product management, what's the best way to work? Should you work with roadmaps or should you work with objectives? Those are two very different concepts, and we can talk about both of them. But they're definitely very different. Maybe we'll get the simple one out first. Product management and project management are just two extremely different skill sets. And I do believe that project management skills are useful for everybody in the world. I mean, pretty much everybody, certainly everybody in business. I don't think I've ever met a successful CEO that didn't know how to run a project, for example. There's skills that are valuable to every leader. But that doesn't mean that that's the essence of your job. Like, I would not argue that a CEO's job or a head of product's job, the essence is project management. It's not. Now, if you're a delivery manager, the essence of your job is project management. So that's a very critical job. But if you're a product manager, the essence of your job is not project management. You do some, we all do some, but your job is to figure out something worth building. That's your job if you're a product manager. And essentially, there are two ways of doing it. One way is you give your team a list of features to build. That's usually delivered in the form of a roadmap. And the other way is you give your team a set of problems to solve. Those are usually delivered in the form of objectives. Those are the two ways of working. Now I have no point in hiding my bias. I don't think that it's a smart thing to do to give your teams features to build. I think people will do much better job if you give them more latitude in coming up with the best solution to the problem. So I vastly prefer giving teams problems to solve rather than features to build. Now, that part of that is morale, honestly. Just people will take ownership more. They will feel more sense of pride if they are given a problem to solve. That is one of the core principles of, I think, just leadership in general, but certainly in tech product companies. It's something that Andy Grove at Intel believed deeply. It's something that Dave Packard and Bill Hewlett believed deeply. It's something that Google's leaders believe deeply. Amazon, Apple, they believe that. I have quotes from all of them that argue that same point, that, like Steve Jobs' famous, we don't hire these smart people to tell them what to do. We hire them so they can show us what's possible. So, it's fundamentally, it's two philosophies of the world. I also believe that what's really behind the people who like roadmaps is arrogance. They think that they know the answer. And so if you just build this, and this could come from a product manager, but it usually comes more from executives and stakeholders, but they think that they know the answer. If you build these 25 things this quarter, we're going to make all this money. And they conveniently don't like to look at the results over the last 10 quarters of doing exactly that. Because, of course, the companies and the business schools that have done that retrospective, that analysis, it's no secret today that roughly 80% of those things on the roadmaps don't actually deliver the money, the outcomes that you hoped. But that doesn't mean they're still arrogant. They still think next quarter will be different. So that's what's bad about roadmaps, is they lock us in. Well, there's several things, but one is that they lock us in to all these features, most of which won't work, as opposed to giving a team a problem to solve and holding them accountable to the result. They might try the very same features that were on the roadmap. The difference is, if those features don't work, they try something else. In a roadmap, they just say, it's not my fault. We built what you told us to. We delivered it on time, on budget. It's your fault if it doesn't do what you want. And of course, you get the blame game. That is why if you do roadmaps, you can't hold a team accountable. But if you give them problems to solve, you can. So that's really the fundamental thing. And my whole career is pretty much about the difference between how the best companies work and how most companies work. And unfortunately, I think this is the heart of the difference. The best companies really do empower their teams. Like Bill Campbell said, the most important thing is an empowered engineer. The engineers, of course, probably the most successful product of all time right here, an iPhone. Almost 3.5 years to discover the first iPhone, to do all the work. The hardest part of this was entering text on a touchscreen device. And if Apple was an old style company, I don't think they'd ever, well, who knows? Eventually they would have figured something out, but it certainly wouldn't have happened like it did. But they actually empowered teams to go figure it out. And the team came up with radically different approach to that finally worked. That came from an engineer working closely with a designer, but it came from an engineer. And in most companies, the engineers are not even allowed to pursue problems like that. They're just told to shut up and code.
Yeah.
Shut up and dribble, as we say.
Dania has a question.
Yes.
I think perhaps Marty has just noted something which is related to my question. The title of the book is Inspired. Marty, for how long do you think a tech product company could be inspired so that they can make sure the success is not short-lived, given that if you want to become bigger and expand, you need to standardize some of your processes. You need to have something that we call best practice. And sometimes in doing so, you become a little bit less risk averse, if you want, and therefore it could affect the innovation. What is the right balance between innovative company? I want my company to still be innovative so it can be inspired for a longer time. And also, in the same time, I want to expand. Therefore, I need some discipline, some organization. Having in mind that the technology sector is probably the quickest sector to change all the time, so we need innovation. What do you think the secret recipe for this balance between expanding and having standard processes and also still being able to innovate?
Okay, that's a beautiful question. And but you might not like my answer, but I will warn you, but it's a really good question because it really gets to the heart. Most companies, as they grow, we like to say it informally, they lose their mojo, which means they lose their ability to consistently innovate. And I argue that loss of a mojo is directly related to what you are describing. They become bureaucratic. They become process focused. Anytime a mistake was made, they try to prevent that in the future by making rules. And pretty soon you have a bank or you have, a place that hasn't innovated in a generation. And that is, now of course, our job, if you're a tech product company, is that's what we fear more than anything. And of course, we know it is not inevitable. Just look at Amazon. They are literally the most consistently innovative company I've ever met. But many of these companies we're talking about, look at how well they continue to do this. But they do it by being very alert to this mindset that you're describing. And this is the part you might not like. There are two kinds of project management. This is the simplistic Silicon Valley view of the world. You ever heard that? There's only two kinds of people in the world, those that think you can make two kinds of people in the world and those that can't. Well, okay, there's two kinds of project management in the world. The command and control style. In fact, whenever I see those evil, dreaded 3 letters, PMO, we get scared to death because PMO is sort of what represents the evil kind of project management. These people want to control everything. They'll kill almost any company. In fact, I wrote an article recently called Revenge of the PMO, because Agile is like the worst thing ever to happen to a PMO. And they got wounded pretty bad. In fact, they were kicked out of many companies, but they are coming back. And this is not a good thing. We're scared to death of this. This is the kiss of death for a tech product company. And so the other kind of project management is very different. It's very different. These people are our friends. These people are actually there not to control us. They are there to remove impediments for us. It's literally the antithesis kind. Now, that's why we use the term delivery management, because we're scared to call it program management or project management. That's why. It's just a marketing thing, a branding thing. But this is something we're scared of. Now, the truth is, in Silicon Valley or in even a lot of the west part of the US, it's rare to find a PMO mindset. But if you go to the eastern part of the US, especially if you go near the government, Washington, DC, and even, I'm not even talking about all the current craziness. I mean, in general, they have a lot more of these PMO types. And it's not an accident that there's not a lot of tech innovation in that world. Now, in truth, if you're a different kind of company, maybe a manufacturing company, then I'm not really criticizing the PMO for that world. I don't know enough about that world. But in a tech product company, it is very bad. And so and I will also admit that I have this argument, especially when I'm in certain parts of Europe, where there is this belief that process is the answer. That's why I love so much. And I mentioned the quote from Netflix, lead with context, not with process. Process, should be there. Jeff Bezos at Amazon is always saying, process is there to serve, not to drive. That you have to be very careful about process. Do you have to be responsible? Absolutely. You have to make sure you don't put your company's revenue at risk, your brand at risk, your customers at risk. But we know how to do that. We don't need bureaucracy for that. So this is why, project management is often a very sensitive topic in a lot of product companies. And I have to tell them that actually project management is not a bad thing, especially when you grow. You just have to make sure you have the right kind of project management.
And I think that's a beautiful point to finish, because yes, what you're describing is what I would think is modern project management, and seeing the 6 profiles that you've got, the ability to actually find someone to help them from above and actually get the things going and actually fight for this. I think that is where the project manager actually is the new project manager. I like to think, and I do associate the PMO argument that you're making, and indeed PMOs have a lot of bad press, which somehow they manage to suppress and reappear. But there we go. Indeed. Are we running out of time, Manshu?
I think we've just run out of time.
I hate time, but there we go. Imagine the processing one, so there you go.
No, but well, thank you, Marty, for sharing these incredible insights with us. We hope we can get you again next year with your next book.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
It was an honor. Thank you very much.
All right, good luck. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Everybody. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you. That was, it made a difference. Thank you. Thank you, Marty.
Thank you. All right, take care.
Cheers.